Welcome to Shop Talk Live, episode number 303. I know the title of this episode is Oops, All Bandsaws, but there is some other topics talked about here. We talk about hand planing and we talk a little bit about handsawing as well. But yes, it's mostly about bandsaws, and that's fitting because we have the one and only Rollie Johnson joining me and Vic on this show, and it's an incredible conversation. I learned so much, and I think you will too. As always, I just got an email from Sarah in marketing. Hey, Ben, I heard you were sick last podcast and too much of a baby to properly promote anything. Whatever, fine. Way to be a team player. By the way, it's physically impossible for pigs to look up at the sky. They can only bend their necks 45 degrees, which is the angle you woodworkers use in most miters, and listeners can save 20% on Tim Rousseau's e-learning course on miter joinery with the code podcast20. Thank you, Sarah, in marketing, for pointing that out to me. And yes, I'm feeling much better. Also, I just want to say I've been listening to some other podcasts, some Pushkin podcasts or whatever, and I was blown away by the amount of promotion that they do in their podcasts. I don't want to do that. I don't want this podcast to turn into that. So thank you all for listening to this section of the podcast and listening to the ads that run. They help us keep making this podcast. And most importantly, thank you for becoming Fine Woodworking Unlimited members. With the gift giving season coming up, if you want to share a Fine Woodworking Unlimited membership with someone who's getting started in the craft, head on over to finewoodworking.com/fundamentals and check out and think about giving the gift of 3 months of our fundamentals journey. It's an unlimited membership for 3 months, and Amanda and Mike curate content that goes out to the woodworker that you choose every week. And it's just a cool program. And also e-learning courses, a lot coming up. Tom McLaughlin's veneering course is going to be opening up soon. It's really, really great. I just had my hands on the projects that Tom makes, and they're absolutely fantastic. So head on over to finewoodworking.com/fundamentals to check out the fundamentals program. Head on over to finewoodworking.com/e-learning to check out our e-learning programs. And head on over to finewoodworking.com just in general and get the best woodworking information that I believe money can buy. It is a membership. If you want to feel like it's a Patreon to help support this podcast, that's great. But for $10 a month, you're supporting this podcast and you're getting a Fine Woodworking subscription to the magazine that gets delivered to your mailbox, and you get access to everything on the website and over 70 video workshops, like long form project-based video workshops that are how I learned how to woodwork. So check it out. Thank you. We have the dude who wrote the book on bandsaw setup, Rollie. So yes. Like you can't get away from it this time.
No, sir. And
this one, I will, during the mix, I will insert the noise that Karen talks about in this question. But this question came up in one of our e-learning courses, the bowl turning course with Matt Monaco. Karen asked, I was watching one of Matt's lessons, and while he was cutting, the bandsaw suddenly made a different noise, a higher pitch, like it was revving up. I get this noise too when cutting around a curve, and I don't know why. I think it has to do with the saw setup, and I'm using a blade that is okay for the radius I want. Mm-hmm. So, like this little added squeal that comes in. Do you know the noise that I'm talking about, Vic?
I do know. Okay. And I'm actually looking forward to hearing what Rollie has to say about it, because I have no idea. My assumption has always been that there's a density change in the material. And like what I feel like is it feels like all of a sudden the blade starts like cutting faster in a certain section. And sometimes that's matched with a squeal. But I don't know what it is. It appears to still, the surface is still be okay. So I don't ask any questions. I just assume it's some strange magical thing that's happening.
Ooh.
That's right. That's right.
It's perfect for Halloween coming up.
Absolutely.
No. Yes, maybe. How's that? Okay. We answered that.
Perfect.
Question.
And I'm glad you tuned in.
Covers the
Okay,
bases.
well, this is my theory, and being a musician, I play an instrument that has steel strings that are under tension, and you pluck them and they vibrate and they create sound. All right, that's what our bandsaws do. Our bandsaw is like a big musical instrument. It has a string on either side of the wheels that is in space. You can go over to your bandsaw and you can take a little wood block and pop that string and it will come out with a tone. My big bandsaw does D sharp. My little bandsaw does C sharp.
Okay.
I've checked it with my tuner.
For the horn players in the audience, that is an E flat and a D flat.
We're not catering to horn players now, are we?
No, I hope
Listen, you watch it, Vic.
I mean, it's
but
either
years
strings or reeds. That's what I think.
Yeah. Well, years ago, I actually read an article written by a guy who was saying that he did tune his bandsaw to a certain note, and that's kind of way out there. But what I theorize happens is that we have a bandsaw that is at a fixed RPM when it's idling, 3,600 feet per minute, usually is the average bandsaw foot per minute speed. And those blades are in tension and they're sitting there real nice, they're running along nice and smooth. And you run wood into it and start cutting it, that changes the harmonic vibration in it.
Uh-huh.
And what happens is that bandsaw blade starts to produce a tone because of the interaction with the wood and all of the swarf going through the gullets, and it vibrates that blade. And that's what you're mostly hearing, because the wood is pretty much incapable of making a sound like that. Wood has good deadening properties to it. If it's very thin and it's suspended like on the body of a guitar, then it can push that vibration out and make a sound. But we're usually, when we're talking resawing, where it's making that noise, it's usually a fairly wide board, and we're cutting thick pieces off of it. And turning, they're cutting the outside of the bowl. And then when we're wood slicing, we're doing splitting a big board. When we cut veneer, we very rarely run into that sound because we're not getting the resonance in the blade. And we can see it on the surface of the wood with those little striations that occur. That's flutter in the blade. That's resonance in the blade. Years ago, people used to talk about watching the blade on the idling side of the bandsaw to set the tension on it. They would see it fluttering, and then you would move the tension until it popped straight and was running true. And that would give you, proper tension. The problem with that is, as soon as you start cutting, you're going to change those RPMs and it's going to be at a different frequency so you can get flutter back in. And flutter is exacerbated by having the wrong blade in or too aggressive a feed speed and having a continuous TPI.
Okay.
Yeah. What I find works the very, very best for resaw blade is an alternating pitch blade. And they're the best resaw blades out there, like the Laguna Resaw King. I use a blade frequently that's called the Wood Saver Plus. It comes from Supercut bandsaws. And the Wood Saver Plus is a carbide impregnated band. And there again, it's an alternating tooth. And then we have the Highland Woodworking Wood Slicer, and that also is an alternating tooth. And again, we get back to this harmonics thing. All right, if we take a handsaw and we're going to cross-cut a board, okay, what's one of the hardest things that happens with the handsaw when we're recutting? To get a clean start. Why are we having trouble getting a clean start? Because those teeth are hitting that board. And even once we get that saw engaged in the wood, the teeth are still hitting the board as they come in. All right. Now, if we have a bandsaw that's going at 3,600 feet per minute, that's a lot of hits on that board. That's an awful lot of hits. Vibrating that blade and carrying that harmonic into the blade and also interacting with the wood. So if we have a 3 and 4 pitch blade, it breaks up that harmonic because now we're alternating the pulse of that pitch. It's like using a plectrum and doing vibrato on it. If we would change the speed of that vibrato, it slightly changes how the string sounds. And that's basically what we're doing with that bandsaw. Some of the cures for it, a variable pitch blade. That works really well. I know there's a YouTube video that they talk about having a skip tooth blade or a tooth with a raker tooth in it. Well, that's giving you more room for the sawdust to come out.
What's a raker tooth?
A raker tooth, you have a blade where you have a pitch on the teeth. You have a right pitch, left pitch, and then you'll have one tooth that goes straight, and that's your raker tooth. And basically what the raker tooth does, it takes that little V that you get off the board. But the big reason for a raker tooth is its name. It rakes out the shavings. Because when we're ripping a board, we're creating long, stringy shavings. Cross-cutting a board, that's no big deal because there we're cutting across the grain. We're creating little bitty fibers, so you don't need a very big gullet between your teeth to get rid of those fibers. But when you're resawing, you need a sizable gullet. That's why we go with 3-tooth or 3-4 pitch, something like that, for resawing, because those bigger gullets can move that material out. One of the reasons a blade like the Resaw King does such a nice job is it has carbide teeth that are significantly wider than the blade on the body of the blade. So those shavings are easier to move out of there because the blade isn't interacting with the cut as much on that blade as it is on blade that have regular teeth with set on them. So it kind of comes down to clearing the cut out to keep that blade from vibrating as bad, and not a real aggressive feed rate, although I've had mine scream like crazy even on a fairly light feed speed. I think it's just, it's part of what we have with bandsaws. Depends on if you're doing something that's got a lot of fiber in it, like maybe elm or ash that's very fibrous. It can't clean it out as much, so it's going to yell at you a little bit more. But I kind of liken it to somebody grabbing a fiddle and a very well rosined bow and then just kind of going across the strings. It's a horrible sound, it just grating, screaming sound. Well, that didn't come from the bow. It didn't come from the hair. It was projected by the fiddle, but it came from the strings. And that's kind of where I think our sound comes from, is it comes from that big string that we've got wound around the wheels and how it's interacting with the wood. And there are lots of variables, but mainly it's just the nature of the beast. We've got a big steel string there that is going to vibrate, and it's going to vibrate to the point where it will create striations in the wood. And that's all just vibrations in that blade. Some of them are kind of diagonal. Well, that's the blade just vibrating as it goes through the board, and then it straightens out once it gets to the bottom. And I think to add to it, there's just a little bit of compression of that blade up at the top. Mm-hmm. And I've had people say, "Oh, you can't compress or stretch those blades." Of course you can. That'd be like saying we can't stretch the strings on the guitar. Well, that's how we tune our guitar. And so when it comes around off that top wheel, it's not being powered, but it's being pulled down in. And if there's a lot of junk in that cut, well, then it's going to compress a little bit up at the top of the cut. That's going to increase the vibration in it. And so now you got harmonics and you got some compression vibration, and it's beating the heck out of that blade. And that blade is just screaming to tell you to knock it off. And there's not much you can do about it other than put a sharper blade on or an alternating pitch blade. 2-tooth per inch would be nice. Nobody makes one for smaller bandsaws, but if you could have a 2 and 1 tooth and they had enough horsepower to run it, you'd probably have a lot quieter saw. But
so what about slowing down the feed rate? Because that would allow a couple of questions. So. Yeah. I'm gonna go back and look at this video because while you were talking, I was thinking, well, wait a minute, if you're cutting out a bowl blank, you are by nature ripping with the grain, and then you're slowly opposing the grain and cross cutting. And I wonder if those long fibers from the rip, if that's when that noise starts in this video.
When you're cutting a circle, you're always cross cutting 100% of the time, because you are always going at a diagonal to the grain. You're never going truly with the grain.
Not on a face grain blank.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Face grain blank. Yeah. I was thinking just regular end grain blank. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but on a face grain blank, you are opposing, you're constantly changing the direction of the blade with the grain. I'm also wondering, because I've experienced.
You're still cutting cross grain. Anytime you're cutting a circle, you're cutting cross grain.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
I know what Rollie's saying, because he's right.
Yeah, you're always cutting cross grain. That's why you can do a pretty good job.
Not tangential to the grain, but cross grain.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. I have two trusted people saying, "Slow down, Ben. You're wrong." So I'm gonna trust that.
Yeah.
But so that whole compression thing, I always thought that was maybe from the blade heating up and expanding. If you're going too fast through a cut, is that playing into anything? Is the blade heating up going to play into something?
Yeah. If you're doing greenwood, which a lot of turners do, greenwood definitely suffers from the heat, because here you've got cool green fibers that instantly get heated up by a hot blade coming through, and the water expands and the fibers expand, and they want to jam that blade up. That's one of the reasons that, like, Carter has a greenwood blade that's just for greenwood. It's got more pitch to it. It's got big gullets, so it does a pretty good job of cleaning the swarf out. But typically, if we're dealing with dried wood, we're not going to have that kind of swelling, because there's no moisture in there to react to the heat. So you're going to have very little transference of that heat to the actual little bit of moisture that's in the cell walls. So really, the biggest thing is compaction of the grain in the gullets. Okay. If you feed too fast, if you've got a dirty blade, people never think to clean their blades. They just use them. But if the gullets are all crudted up in there, well, that swarf can't eject out of there quick enough. And so then you start plugging those gullets up. The only place that sawdust can go is alongside the front of the blade where the pitch on the teeth are, and that can really slow the saw down. Now, as far as how much difference it makes in the squeal of the blade, who knows? I don't know of any way you could really test that, because there's no way you can check the vibrations. It's moving way too fast. There's no device you're going to put on there that's going to check the oscillations. And like a string moves pretty much in a circular pattern, where these really can't move in a circular pattern. They're going to move side to side. So they're going to chatter in that cut, because that will be how their harmonics work. They aren't going to go back and forth because of the bandwidth, but they'll chatter side to side with their harmonics. And I think that's where the majority of our squeal is coming from, is just that blade is really getting the crud beat out of it as it's trying to cut through that wood. And it's got a very high pitch. It'd be fun I've never done it, but I should take one of my fiddle bows, rosin the heck out of it, and see if I can play my bandsaw. I've got a friend, Rich Wedler, out on the West Coast, who plays the saw. And, you put a little bend in it, and you take your bow and you can play it and make it very melodic, but you can also make it really screech and scream just by not bowing it correctly. So, so there you go.
Well, you could clamp the bearings down on the side of it, and then just sit there with the wheel and change the pitch as the guide blocks go up and down. You're good.
Yeah, there you go.
I think we might be onto something here.
Yeah,
Vic.
Well,
how much of it could possibly be bearing issues, Vic? I mean, do you?
Oh, that's a different sound altogether.
Okay.
If you've got bad bearings, then then you'll know that. That's a different sound altogether. I actually have a little stethoscope that's actually designed, and Rollie will understand. Of course, he probably owns one. It's a little stethoscope that has a metal pin on it, and you use it. So if you've got like an old machine, let's say, for example, and you suspect that a bearing is no good, you actually put the stethoscope on and then touch the side of the like bearing housing, and you can actually, it amplifies everything, of course. And so then you hear the grinding sound of that bearing, and then you can tell right away, oh yeah, that's where it is. I had never seen that done before. And then a friend of mine, Jack, who runs an Instagram account called Jack English Machines, he does all the Wadkin rebuilds and all that other stuff. And so that's where I learned that trick. And like you can pinpoint where exactly in a machine that a noise is coming from just by sort of going around and testing various areas. But as far as the bearing goes, yeah, like, I mean, if your bearings are seized up, like every time I do a blade change, I just check all my bearings. My machine has like has thrust bearings and then lateral bearings. It doesn't have like cool blocks or ceramics or anything like that. So I always check everything and make sure everything's working freely, because the last thing you want there is to have a frozen bearing and then all of a sudden you're generating a bunch of heat, and then that in itself, metal on metal, is going to make a noise, and then on top of that you're heating up the blade. And I think, more to Rollie's point, as that starts to heat up, and then you really start to, all things are changing now, and you go from there. But I'm fascinated by Rollie's answer. I think that makes perfect sense to my mind, being a guitar player and understanding how tension. And you're right, I've heard of people being able to like pluck tune their bandsaw, to get a certain note, and that's what they say is their, like, you kind of dismiss that as being a little bit hokey, but there's probably something to that. It's obviously going to change depending upon your blade guard and guides and all that other stuff. But yeah, I think it's fascinating, the noises. I mean, ultimately you don't want your bandsaw to make any noise. I mean, I just had a student in the shop the other day, and we were talking about, he couldn't believe how quiet my bandsaw was. And I said, it's because it's tuned up, it's running well. It's supposed to be quiet. If it's screeching and squealing at you, there's something wrong. So I think feed rate, again, Rollie sort of indicated feed rate. Yes. That's critical. A lot of people way overfeed their saws, and then you end up with a barrel cut, like Rollie was saying. Like the shavings have got nowhere to go, so the blade starts to like do these funky things, and all of a sudden you're getting these sort of like, coopered cuts as a result of it, and that's problematic. We were always taught a single finger feed. So if you put your finger on the back of the board and you push, like if you're pushing with one finger and you feel like it's starting to hurt, you're pushing too hard. So then dial it back. And so that's perfect, because if you stick a board down, like a 1-inch board down and you're just doing a simple rip, well, you can, with one finger, you can push that fairly quickly. But if you stand that board up on edge and resaw it, you can't push it as fast with a single finger. So the single finger trick works well. I mean, obviously you don't want to, like just gauge your how fast you're going and then get your finger out of there. And, because you don't want to, push
through the cut with one finger.
Well, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. Don't say, well, Vic said it on the podcast that I was supposed to push my finger through. Right. Yeah. You like, even if you do push your finger in, like you're under no obligation to finish the cut. Like, you know what I mean? Just get your finger out of there.
So, I mean, for me, Rollie, I always thought that the setting the tension on a bandsaw, the most important thing for me was always consistency between a 1/4-inch blade, consistency between the different 1/4-inch blades.
Yep.
A new blade and an old blade or something like that. Have you ever used, and it's that easy tension thing?
Yeah, I've got one on my bandsaw.
Okay.
Yeah. It's accurate, at least according to my finger, because that's what I've always used for tensioning.
Yeah. Okay.
On the back side where the blade is open from wheel to wheel, right up by the wheel. If I can push it easily 1/4 to 1/2 inch with my finger without forcing it, I've got the right tension. And there again, people tend to over tension blades because they have a little problem with wandering. Now, if you have drift, first thing you do with drift is you put the widest blade you can put on your bandsaw, you tension it correctly, have it running right in the middle of the wheels so that it's, even side on both. You get a long straight edge. Now, eye gauging now makes a magnetic straight edge you can snap onto your blade that has a gap for the teeth. Okay. Yep. You're going to very carefully set that down to the table, and you're going to measure over to your miter slots to see if your table's square. Most people, their tables are not square. So then you're going to move your table around, loosen all 4 bolts, leave one as a pivot, move it around until it's parallel, tighten it up. Okay, that should take care of your drift. If you got a sharp blade that's appropriate for the wood and the right feed rate, it'll cut straight all the time. If you have a blade that wanders, the top goes one way and the bottom goes the other way, that's your thrust bearings. Thrust bearings are the single most important thing that we can do setting up our bandsaw to cut, because we have a ribbon of steel that relies on beam strength. Okay. In other words, it can flex side to side real easy, but it can't flex fore and aft. Okay. And people say, oh, it'll bow over there to touch the guides. No, it won't, because, well, it will. If your thrust bearings are not coplanar, if they're at different levels, that blade will go back to those guides, but the only way it can do it is by twisting. It can't bend. So the top is going one way, the bottom is going the other way, and then they like to oil can a little bit as you loosen up your feed rate. So you got a cut that's wandering all over the place, top and bottom. Sometimes it'll just take a set on the bottom and go in one direction until you're binding up and having all kinds of nasty squealing noises. Mostly for me as the operator of the saw, but the thrust bearings are really, really critical. So if you have, and the way I set my thrust bearings is by ear. Every blade has a little bit of wobble in it, just a little bit. Sometimes by the weld, sometimes just the blade. And I turn the saw by hand with the upper wheel, and I move my thrust bearing. I make sure the side guides are out of the way. Move my thrust bearing forward until I hear it just hit with that little high spot. It'll just brush it, just makes a little and tighten it down. Make sure that it doesn't move forward or backward. And you got the top done. Now you match it to the bottom guide, and you'll hear a shook as it goes through the 2 guides. And when you've got it so it's making that same noise on both guides, you've got it set up as accurately as you can get. So
I'm going to repeat this just for myself to make sure, because I'm going to go do this, because I really need to change my bandsaw blade. Yeah. So there's a high point on the back of every blade, right?
Yep.
So you're just getting that high point to barely kiss that first thrust bearing.
Yep.
And then you bring in the bottom one, and it's going kiss, top, bottom.
Exactly. Yep.
And so that blade is barely touching at one spot on the highest point of the back of the blade.
Exactly. So in essence, it's idling away from the guide when you're not using it. As soon as you put wood against it, boom, it hits both of those thrust bearings, same time, not far enough to cause any problems with the rest of the bandsaw. We're only talking less than 10,000ths of an inch probably, but enough that it's supported. And as long as it's supported top and bottom on our bandsaws, it will cut straight. And, provided the blade's sharp and the teeth aren't damaged on one side. But I've, in some demonstrations I've done, I take the side guides out if they're block guides and lay them on the bench. And then we rip a bunch of wood. We resaw wood without any side guides. Side guides are only needed if you're cutting curves. They just keep the blade from rolling over. So this is, I know at one point somebody I had read or seen or whatever, that when you're setting up those thrust bearings, you don't want them touching the back of the blade. So the problem with that explanation is it could be 6 inches away from the back of the blade and not touching the back of the blade just as easily as where you have it. So this is just such a great, again, repeatable, measurable. Any blade, any saw, it's the same. Yeah. They used to have the dollar bill trick or the paper bag trick. Well, you can push it up they're pretty tight with a dollar bill in it. Pull that dollar bill out and it's still tight to the guide because you move the guides to get it to where it is, And
Yeah.
that's, some people have bandsaws that you just cannot resaw with. And the main reason is the upper guide posts can flex. And if the upper guide post can flex, if you don't have an absolutely rigid frame, that upper guide post flex, and that's exactly what it's doing. They're not coplanar anymore, and now it twists. Back in the 80s and 90s, when the first wave of Taiwan saws were coming into the U.S., that was a real big problem. You couldn't resaw with them. 20 years ago, I suppose, I did a review on 18-inch bandsaws, and there was, I think, 13 or 14 bandsaws in it, and one passed my test.
Wow.
The rest of them were just flexi flyers. One of them, 6 pounds of pressure against the upper guide post would move it back about 60 thousandths of an inch. It just, that's a 16th of an inch back. And it had a hard time ripping a 2-inch thick board because it was so flexible. But if you have a good saw with good rigid frame, and the new ones, thankfully, they've answered that. And they're stout enough now that if we put the right blade in, we can make them work really well. And the right blade is really nice. Like you were saying, it's time to change my blade. A friend of mine was having problems with his saw, and he goes, "Yeah, I guess it's time I change a blade. What would you recommend I buy?" And I said, "Well, what do you got in it?" "Well, the blade that came with it, And it's like, you've had that for probably a year now. And
people chronically don't change their blades frequently enough, and
exactly.
I think that's part of the problem. And I think part of it is that they don't always know what to do in order to set up that blade properly. And that piece of advice that you gave, Rollie, about bringing up the thrust bearing till it just kisses, that's the most critical thing. And I think I do the exact same thing, except I don't depend on the sound because I spent 14 years in the artillery. I actually look at the thrust bearing.
Yeah,
and when I manually, it just catches it and gives it like a little spin.
Yep.
And then when I prove the saw, which means I turn the saw on and off quickly after I've done all the setup, just to make sure that, because if there's any loud banging or scraping, you've done something wrong. But I look at that bearing, and I look for the bearing to basically rotate,
Yep.
rotate. And that's basically telling me that highest point on the back of the blade is just kissing, which means as soon as I apply pressure, boom, that bearing spools up. So
I guarantee you that my thrust bearings have always been too far back now. I know it because when I prove the blade, my thrust bearing's not moving at all.
Right.
And
that's bad.
So because in my head, it's not supposed to be touching the blade until you push wood into it.
That explains a lot of your work, Ben.
Yeah. Or lack of.
No, if you two saw how dull my bandsaw blade, you wouldn't talk to me anymore.
Yeah.
So you should come on over. Let's just cut this off at the pass.
And there you go. Talking about blades again. Most people use inappropriate blades. I tell them you need a set of 3 blades. That's what you need. And one of them is going to be a 3 or 4 tooth per inch, preferably alternating pitch blade for resawing, 5/8 to 3/4 inch wide. That's your resaw blade. Then the blade you're going to have on there, an awful lot, is going to be a 3/8 inch thick, a 3/8 inch wide, 6 tooth per inch hook tooth blade, because it can cut a decent radius, fairly tight. It will track well enough that you can resaw smaller material. Now, my definition of resaw is anything thicker than 3 inches is a resaw. Anything thinner than 3 inches, you're ripping the wood. But you can do a decent job of ripping with that blade, and it's just a good all-around, all-purpose blade. And then, of course, I've got a 1/4 inch, 10 or 12 tooth per inch regular tooth blade for cutting tight curves. But that means you really need to have 3 bandsaws. Just saying,
So, Vic, do you think that bandsaw blades are kind of one of those things where it's almost like hand plane blades, where like people don't sharpen because they don't do it often enough, and it takes them a long time to get back to where they want to be. So it's
100%.
like if in your head you're not swapping out a bandsaw blade and you have a new blade there, we'll say, right? Because it's too much of a pain in the butt to get it back to where you were. That's just more proof that you need to do that to get the practice in.
100%. Like, I mean, the problem that people run into is that they don't necessarily know exactly what they're doing, right? They have an idea. They might have watched some YouTube videos. Hopefully they've read some of Rollie's books to be able to understand what they're trying to do. But then they've got a brand new blade and they're terrified of dulling it. And so I tell people, listen, take your crummy blade that's in there now. And like, I mean, I kind of smiled when Rollie was saying his friend had the OEM blade that came with the saw still on there, because those are historically garbage, not to put too fine an edge on it. And so I always tell people, like, before you even get started, if you get a brand new bandsaw that has the included blade, that included blade is really not good for anything. So what I would do is practice. Take it off the saw completely, because there's tricks to getting that blade around the various little, it's kind of like a little jungle gym in there. And then take that very same blade and put it on and try to like navigate how you have to put it on, how you have to handle the blade, right? Because now you're handling something pretty sharp that, can bend and flex and twist. And I've taken to wearing like those contact gloves that have, the rubber on the palms, and they're very tight. And so I find that that's very helpful. And put it back on, and then set all your guides and your bearings and get everything all set up, and then take it off. That way, the first time you're swapping blades and you just bought a brand new blade, you're not going to freak out because you're like, oh, I've never done this before. I don't do it very often. It's like, just once you do it a couple of times, it's like anything in woodworking. Once you do it a few times, like it starts to become second nature, and away you go. But bandsaw blades, sandpaper, and hand plane blades are the three things that people do not address often enough. And I mean, people routinely cut with dull blades on their bandsaws. They overuse sandpaper, and they're terrified of sharpening a plain blade, which I don't understand any of those.
You mean well-used 60 grit isn't like 400 grit?
Yeah.
Do it again.
I'm picturing these like 42-year-old swatches of sandpaper in your that are kind of almost like pajama material.
Yeah.
I call it burnishing paper.
Yes. Vic, one little trick too for people who aren't used to swapping blades is when we put our blade on and we start tracking it, and the people, they got the spring clamps up on top to keep it, and they slide it on the bottom, put tension on it, run it backwards.
Yes.
So that it doesn't catch on anything. Run it backwards until it's up on the wheels. Now you can run it forward and track it.
That's a really good tip. And that's fantastic, because if it is going to catch something, it's just going to push the blade out of the way, as opposed to like grabbing a tooth and then maybe, good tip.
I'll add in one little thing, especially when you're getting going, just move the guides way out of the way.
Oh yeah.
First thing you do. Don't for
a moment think, oh, I'm gonna barely move these and get this new blade right where it's supposed to be and get right back to. You're gonna chase your tail for 10 minutes, and then all of a sudden you're gonna realize that your bottom thrust bearing's been 3 inches away for the whole time, and blah blah, and it's just move everything out of the way and start over. It's fast.
It's the same as a hand plane blade, Ben. Like, if you have a hand plane that has the ability to open and close the mouth, right? When you go to put that blade in or take it out for sharpening, open that thing wide open.
Open away open. Yeah.
Because once you sharpen it and it's like beautifully sharp, and then bang, you hit it into the toe. Oh yeah, you start saying some very interesting words then. And it's preventable, right?
Yes.
All right. Let's take a break. That was like 45 minutes on solid bandsaw. That was awesome.
That was awesome. Rollie, like, I don't know where you're going, but I'm following you.
Hey, I'm Joshua Klein.
And I'm Mike Updegraff.
And we're from Mortise and Tenon magazine, all about hand tool woodworking.
We put out 2 issues per year and always ad-free. It's more like a hefty journal.
And we publish our own books and courses and even the Mortise and Tenon podcast.
We're all about hand tool craftsmanship for the 21st century.
If this is up your alley, you should check out our website at mortiseandtenonmag.com.
Let's get to this question, which is wonderful. This one's from Bart. And I think that this is fresh, and I wanted to get to this one sooner than later. I have a 13-inch wide piece of 10-quarter black locust and was asked to make an outdoor table. First off, Rollie, you love black locust, don't you?
Yeah, black locust is hard stuff. Yeah,
Right.
I've got several hundred feet of it stickered out and back.
Cool.
Yeah.
I need some. The piece is around 8 feet long. I'm a hobbyist and I don't have a bandsaw. So this person's not listening at this point, because if you don't have a bandsaw, this was not your episode. Sorry, Bart. I was looking for alternatives to running it through my 13-inch lunchbox planer or handsawing, because the width is too much for a jigsaw. Doesn't seem safe. I ruled that out. I figured I could run it through the table saw to get it started. And I do have a Sawzall and can get blades that would be long enough. Do you know of any resaw type blades for Sawzalls, or favorite technique for the week? So at first I read this, I was like, Bart, what, huh? And then it was like, this is like, okay, I like where his head's at. What are we doing here to resaw a 13-inch wide piece of black locust?
I hope he has a friend who has a really nice bandsaw.
Okay.
That was my answer.
There's no way.
Well, if you get the board so that it's square on both edges, and he can run it through his planer to get at least one surface flat. And he can get the edges square. And then you take it to your table saw and you make a series of passes, raising the blade until you're up as high as you can raise it. Hopefully you got a table saw. It's got a riving knife on the back to make that doable. Mm-hmm. And you go up as high as you can, which would be about 4 inches on each side. Okay, so now you're 8 inches into a 13-inch board. You got that 5 inches in the middle. So you take a nice, sharp rip saw, hand saw, and you use those kerfs as a guide, and you recut that board. And black locust, 5 inches wide, trapped in it's going to be one heck of an aerobic workout.
Oh yeah.
Well, I'm sorry. 10-quarter board, humping a 10-quarter board, 8 foot long over the table saw that many times. He's already tired.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. But that would be one way, that you could do it by hand. Tedious, but doable. And make sure it's a rip saw and not just a crosscut hand saw, or you'll be there an additional 3 days.
The nice part about what Rollie's suggesting is that because you've already done 4 inches on either side, that saw is going to want to track pretty straight. So if you have a straight rip saw, that's going to track pretty. You're not going to worry about accidentally going outside of that kerf. You may sort of wander in the kerf a little bit, but you're definitely not going to come out of it. Because when you look at like the way people, like they sell those bow saws, and then they sell a special kerfing plane that basically, so this is for people who want to like resaw completely by hand.
Gotcha, yeah.
They use the kerfing plane, which is basically just is like a really thin plow plane, and it basically puts a kerf all the way around a board that you want to resaw, and then you drop the bow saw into that, and then work that back and forth. And because you've already pre-cut, the saw wants to take the path of least resistance, so it's going to like just stay within those curves. My first thing with this is that you have a table saw but not a bandsaw. And so that, I think, right away should be addressed in the sense that
No, we're not tool shaming.
No, we're not tool shaming.
No,
We're not
not
tool
tool
shaming. All I'm
shaming,
saying
no.
is that if you're going to have one or the other, I would prefer to have a bandsaw. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying.
Absolutely.
But most beginners or most people getting going in the craft don't do that. So
That's because we're a plywood nation. We build boxes. And
That's
boxes get cut out.
I
with
wish that
plywood.
could be the title of this episode. We're a plywood nation.
Plywood
Yeah.
Nation.
That's so great.
But yeah, exactly. And so we're used to having the table saw, but when you're working with solid wood, the bandsaw is way better.
Yeah.
Anyway,
bet.
all that to say, Rollie kind of said jokingly, like, I hope he has a buddy that has like a big bandsaw. But I mean, in some cases, like when you're talking about 10-quarter boards, depending on the sawmill, like I know, like I have a local sawmill here that I go to that, is a wood seller, and he caters to the, on top of furniture makers and stuff, he caters to people who are building post and beam or log homes or those sorts of things. And so he has a wood miser type bandsaw mill, and he was telling me that he can actually put an 8-quarter board down on that mill and then resaw it right in the center.
Yep. Absolutely.
And he says he does it all the time. Now, your yield, whether or not you get what you need out of it, because like resawing a 8-quarter board to get 2 3/4-inch pieces sounds good on paper, but doesn't always work. But in this case here, if he's got a 10-quarter board, like if there's somewhere around that has that, because like we're joking about the amount of physical exertion required, but 8 feet. 13-inch wide, 10-quarter, like that's a big, and like putting that up on a table saw and pushing that through safely and all that other stuff.
That's a heavy piece of wood.
That's a heavy piece of wood. You better have a couple of people with you, and then of course, doing the hand rip. To talk about, like, I don't know of any Sawzall blade that would be appropriate for this, because like 98.6% of Sawzall use, keeping in mind that most stats are made up on the spot, they're designed to crosscut.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right? They're designed to crosscut 2x4 material. They're drywall. Bimetal blades are designed for cross-cutting and hitting nails and all that other stuff. I've never seen a rip tooth Sawzall blade.
No, but a nail designed for cutting nails, or a blade designed for cutting nails, would probably work good as black locust.
yeah, fair enough.
It's about that hard.
It's about that hard.
Now, if a guy did the kerfs on both sides, and again, bringing up one point, you better have a pretty powerful saw to cut 4 inches into black locust, even if you're doing it at steps.
I'm telling you, I think that would feel sketchy to me.
Yeah, well, you can do it. I know a guy who did it, several times.
Yeah, but I think your point is valid, Rollie. You need to have a saw that has the power to do it. You're not doing that on a job site saw.
No, not at all. And also, what would work better than a hand push saw for ripping would be one of the big Japanese pull saws that are designed for ripping, like they use for joinery for timber frame, because you can get some beef behind it without killing yourself, and they do cut teeth pretty rapidly. Yeah, big teeth. Yeah. And so that, since you have guides top and bottom to keep it straight, you could probably split that board reasonably quickly. Put it on a couple sawhorses close to the ground, and with a couple of planks on either side that you can stand on. So you're literally standing over the board, and then you're pulling up through that board. That would work, but it would be pretty humorous. I'd love to see a video of that.
Well, it's like those old Japanese paintings that you see of the saw pit, right? And basically what you've described, having the yoke where the board is sitting on top, and then there's a guy on the top and there's a guy at the bottom. The guy at the top, is pulling, the other guy's pulling it through again so he can pull again. And it's just like, oh my goodness, it just... Yeah.
I'd love to be the guy in the bottom of the pit saw. That would be just a really nice job.
You know what though? It would be fun for about 7 minutes.
Oh, I
No,
think
I'm
that's
thinking
6
about
minutes and 40 seconds too long.
I'm thinking about 3.5 seconds.
Okay.
The
That's
first pull.
first set. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm done. Okay,
I'm out of here.
but yeah, it's doable. Practical, no.
So realistically, he's gonna plane it or save it for a bench top or something, or a big old something.
Yeah, guitars.
Well, yeah, okay. Now he's gonna saw it down to 2 millimeters. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, plane it. You got a good planer.
Yeah,
10-quarter down to
you
2
would.
millimeters.
You absolutely would. I have no doubt that you would do it just cause.
Yeah.
I mean, it's 8 foot by 13, so at least you get a lot of guitar sides out of it.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A lot of
All
mulch.
right. let's get one more question answered, and this one is about hand planes. And I got 2 hand plane aficionados here. So this one's from James. I have a smallish basement shop, and I do not have room for a jointer. Well, a joiner with a board on it. And I love that those are 2 totally different things. You can get a joiner in there. You just can't use it. So my thought is to use hand planes to flatten my stock. I recently got a number 5, and it has been great. I can flatten certain lengths pretty easily. Longer lengths seems to be advised to be done with a jointer plane, like a number 7. That plane, however, seems to always be way lower on the list of suggested planes for folks to use. Even further complicating it, the rule of thumb math doesn't seem to add up. If a plane can usually flatten a board that is about twice its length, wouldn't a number 7 be limited to under 4 foot boards? Rollie's shaking his head no.
No.
And Vic's just wide-eyed, waiting for Rollie to just go.
No, I know, because I can tell that Rollie and I are thinking the exact same thing.
Yeah, we are.
And the reality is that when you're, first of all, in this question, you have to also ask the question: do you have a thickness planer? Right? Because if you have a thickness planer, then with a number 5 jack, you can get that board plenty flat enough on one side to act as a reference surface, go through your thickness planer, flip it end for end, and then take the mess you made with the jack plane off, and then now you are working with parallel stock and everything's good. If you don't have the ability to do that, then you have to be a little bit more. Then I would recommend a jointer, because you're going to use your jack to get the majority of the work done, right? It's not like you're just going to grab the longest plane you have and just start going for it, right? I map out what the board looks like, and that is as simple as either turning the plane on its edge or using a straight edge, and I put pencil mark wherever there's high spots, and I just work the whole board that way. Right now, if you end up, now again, how big of boards are we talking about here? Nobody's flattening, except for our last question, nobody's flattening 8 foot long stock, right? So you're working with furniture size pieces, presumably. And so how much cup or how much bow you have, it's hard to say. But I basically plan out all the work, and what you end up seeing is a topographical map of the board. And then I can take the jack plane and I can scrub those areas away so that they're now parallel and flat to everything else around it. If then I didn't have the thickness planer, then I would grab the jointer and I would start working that across the entire surface. Then that's going to help bring things into flat. But I mean, like, I think a number 7 is plenty long, and the math, the math doesn't add up. It doesn't work quite like that. But I feel the same way about power jointers. Everybody wants these big long bed jointers, and I don't like, when you consider that the majority of furniture got made with a number 7 or a number 8, 22 to 24 inches long. Why are we after these big jointers with big long, big log beds on them? It doesn't make any sense. And the reality is that you'll get things flat with those 2 planes easily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you with the long joiner. For years, when I was beginning and poor, I had a 4-inch Delta joiner, and I could put together dining room tabletops with it. It's you just have to know how to do it and how to feed it across the bed. Same thing with the hand plane is you have to know, your idea of the pencil. I scribble on wood all the time. That's how I know where I'm going with card scraping, with hand planing, anything, because you can take, say, a number 6. That's kind of my favorite. Where is it? Right there, my number 6. That's my favorite for roughing out. And that's, I suppose, the reason they call it a 4-plane, an FORE plane, is that's the first plane you'll drop on a rough sawn board. But with a lot of pencil scribbles, a few passes of it, again, you're going to find all your high spots. And I've got straight edges right on the end of my my plane caddy there, 4 foot and a 2 foot, 4 going across the board diagonally straight, and finding those high spots and making sure I mark them. And it takes a little time, but there's one benefit to using hand planes for straightening, flattening big areas, is that you become really aware of the grain direction before you laminate that top up. And there is one real benefit to that, is you get rid of the striped look of a laminated top, because the grain's all going in the same direction. And we've all taken a board and we've held it under the light, and you can see that chatoyance from one direction, and you turn it the opposite way, and it's a darker chatoyance, because now you're looking down the tubes of the grain, and here you're looking at the backs of the tubes of the grain. And if you have boards that are going opposite direction, one board's going to appear light, the next board's going to appear dark. You switch that board around and you have just the opposite. And so if you're hand planing it, you're going to make sure the grain is going in the same direction. And that gets rid of a lot of that striped look that we see so often in tabletops or big panels, because the grain is going opposite directions. It's like book matching. If you flip it over, you've got one that's light, one that's dark, and you can't get away from it because you're looking at opposite ends of the grain. The benefits to using hand planes: it makes you a better practitioner of wood.
100%.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that, like, that whole number 7, 4 foot, blah blah blah, twice the length of the body, that's only like if you're not thinking when you're hand planing, right? Or like you're a robot operating the hand plane, even, because I could probably take a number 7 and struggle to flatten, a 18-inch board if I did it wrong, right? So it's very rare that you're just pushing a hand plane across the board. You are, looking at it, checking, spot touching it. There's all sorts of skill that goes into flattening a board with a number 7 or a number 5 or whatever, right? So
I think I think what people get into trouble is that they see machines at work. And when you joint a board on a machine, you put that thing on the machine, and then you're going to there's always sort of like a bit of a twist to the board. So you tend to sort of favor those high areas as you put it across the machine. But the thing is that the machine does it all in one shot, right? Whereas with a hand plane, you don't work that way.
Yeah.
Right? You work, like Rollie and I have been saying, you're working in areas that are high, you're removing those high spots, and then you're able to work to a flat tolerance, and then you can, if you have to do any sort of like remedial work. Yeah, there you go.
There's Raleigh's holding up a scrub plane.
Yeah, for really rough work, there it is. And you can get a board amazingly flat with a scrub plane. Yep. Crudely flat, but you can get it flat.
And there's a difference too. That's good that you said that, Rollie, because there's a big difference between flat and smooth. Yeah. Flat is what you need in order to, let's say, reference the bed of a thickness planer and get it through. You could get flat with a side axe.
Yes.
Right? And then put that through the thickness planer and then flip it over and clean the other edge. But
isn't a scrub plane kind of a side axe with handles?
That's right. It's an axe with soul.
Yeah.
But really, like when you but there's a difference between like flat and smooth.
Smooth.
Right? Smooth is what you're getting out of a machine or using a smoothing plane. Flat doesn't look good, but it's flat.
Yeah. You know, winding sticks and a roughing plane and a straight edge, you can get a piece flat. Most of us have planers. And once we get that piece flat, we can have that down on the platen, run it through to get the other side flat, flip it over, and bingo, you got a nice flat,
You got it.
smooth board. And there's the old trope. It's not the size of the wand; it's the magic of the magician. You know, and that's exactly what it is when you're hand planing. is you have to know what you're doing. It's not magical, but damn near.
Right.
It feels magic. It feels magical when it works because, you know, when you get good at it, it's so much fun to flatten a messed up surface with a hand plane. It really is. It just feels great. When's
the last time either of you four-squared a board with hand tools only?
Oh, not four-square, but I have one, got one side.
Yep. Okay,
Yeah, frequently. I mean, probably within the last 3 or 4 months.
Okay, so roughed it and then through the plane.
Yeah, I have an 8-inch joiner. It's you can do a 12-inch wide, you can do a 16-inch wide board on an 8-inch joiner, but that means that you've got to take off the guard and you make a rabbet basically, and you get 8 inches of it flat. And now you use an 8-inch wide piece of plywood under that allows you to run it through your planer to get the top side flat. And then you flip it over and you plane off that rabbet that you have on the excess material next to the rabbet. You can do that, but it's much quicker just to throw it up on the workbench and flatten it off with the number 6 and then run that through with the platen down. So
there you go.
Yeah.
Well,
so many methods, so little time.
It's
so many ways to do the same damn thing.
So much kindling.
Well, you know, Paul Sellers, who's the English woodworker there that does a lot of hand tool stuff, his favorite and almost only used plane is a number 4. And he demonstrates how to flatten boards with it and how to true edges. And the reason why it works is because he's not just sort of, like Ben was saying, mindlessly pushing the board over the plane. He knows, okay, like if I've got a 4-foot long surface and it's got a bit of a bow in it, he's going to figure out where, obviously it's on the ends, and he's going to sort of taper cut those ones and taper cut the other one. And then now he's close to square and flat. And then he just puts a number 4 over that nice and straight, and it straightens it right up. So there's no reason why you can't use a number 4 to do all of this. You know, it just requires more work because now you don't have the benefits of a longer sole. But I mean, essentially, you know, when you look at the original Japanese planes, which were basically a chisel shaped like a leaf that, you know, you pulled across the surface, they were flattening boards with that thing, right? And it's like that had no soul. All that had was just like the finesse of the user. And they knew, okay, that area is high, that area is high, that area is high. I'm just going to work those down a little bit. When you think about it in those terms, all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, this is not like a machine. This is using hand tools, and it's different.
Well, even on a joiner, if I've got a board with twist on it, of course, you're going to identify where the twist is, and you're going to accommodate it. You're going to make sure that on the outfeed table, that twisted side is down, the high part, and then run it through. And then you're going to do the opposite on the next pass, and you get rid of it that way. And
well,
that's
and,
the same.
and there's, but the same thing with any power joiner or whatever. There's certainly a way of running a board across a joiner and not winding up with a flat board.
Or
you know,
a wedge,
depending on,
or a wedgie.
Yeah, totally. You know, depending on how skilled the user is behind that machine or that plane or whatever tool, there's very, very few tools that woodworkers use on a day-to-day basis that require no input.
Magic of the magician.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, that does it for this episode of Shop Talk Live. Thank you again for being Unlimited members. Thank you again for gifting Fundamentals memberships. And thank you so much for taking our e-learning courses. We've been having a lot of fun with them. If you have any questions you'd like answered on the show, send them into shoptalk@taunton.com. If you're watching on YouTube, click that thumbs up button, leave a good comment, whatever. If you really feel called to it, you can be awesome and leave a great review on our iTunes page. It helps other people, other woodworkers find this podcast. And we'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode. Thanks for listening.
Kind of like Ben. Ben was sitting there like he didn't care what you were selling. He was buying it. He like.
I'm going to be honest with you. I wasn't listening at all.
Yeah. Yeah, he hears me so much. He has a real good propensity for just tuning me out. I'm just kind of.
What?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, now that we're off the air.